Today I'm joined by Steve Foley. Steve is triple Olympian, competed at the 1976, 1980 and 1984 Olympic Games, representing Australia in diving. Biggest achievements, next to being a triple Olympian, the first Australian diver to final in the 3-meter springboard and 10-meter platform. After his career, Steve has moved on to be a performance director for Australia, GB, and the US. Welcome, Steve.
Yes, thank you, Christian, for having me.
Steve, let's go back to the beginning. How did it all get started? How did you get started with diving?
Yeah, it was probably by accident. I had asthma as a young child, and there were no sort of Ventolins or puffers in those days. So the doctor said, take up swimming. It'll be good for the lungs and enlarge the breathing. So I took up swimming and just wasn't for me. It was a bit boring looking at a black line, even though I respect all the swimmers out there. And it happened to have a diving pool at the other end of the aquatic centre. So I said, oh, that looks more exciting. So I started to jump off the diving boards, and one thing led to another.
At what age was that?
I was around about 8 or 9.
Okay, cool. In your athletic life, what was your darkest moment?
Probably, I think the 1980 Moscow Olympics. You and I were talking about the boycott and different things that were happening in the world at that stage. But certainly in Australia, and at the time I was 22 years of age, so still pretty young and immature. And the government did not want us to go, but they also weren't prepared to go to the lengths the USA did and absolutely stop everyone from going. So they put a lot of pressure on the individual divers or athletes. And in my case, I got a phone call from the Minister of Sport from the federal government saying, we don't want you to go, we'd like you to boycott. It's the right thing to do because of the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. And we'd like to give you $6,000 not to go. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm a millionaire. I can drive a convertible and my hair can blow in the wind and I'll just be super cool. Because $6,000 back then was a lot of money, especially when everything was very amateur. But then I just sort of realized, this is my dream. I've been training so hard all my life to go to the Olympics. And surely I could make a better statement by going to the Olympic Games as an athlete and uniting the world. To me, that would be a better protest. So I turned the government down, and their comment was, well, if you do go, you'll get no money in the future. And I said, well, I've had none in the past. Bye-bye. But it was a really dark time. I also deferred from college to focus on my diving. So I worked in a bank, and the bank were very good. They would give me time away to travel, compete, train. And a customer from the bank invited me out for lunch, and he was a multimillionaire. He was the bank's richest customer. And originally he was from Poland. So he suddenly brought up how the Soviet Union invaded Poland, I think in 1956 or whatever it was. And he's prepared to give me some money not to go, and he'll fund any trip I do in the future. And again, if you do go, he'll shut his account. So, these were tough times for a 22-year-old. It wasn't even about being offered money. It was the position you felt you were put in. The government made us feel like traitors. And here was a customer in the bank threatening to close his account just because I wanted to compete in the Olympics. So without a doubt, it was tough and dark times. But like everything, it's perhaps a turning point in your career.
And how did it all turn out at the Olympics?
Yeah, that's the funny thing. We had to sneak out of the country because they thought we were traitors and the public were against us. once the Olympics took off, people back home were watching the Olympics and really enjoying it. And we had to make some sacrifices. The minute you finished competing, you pretty much got on a plane and came home. So it was quite surreal. One minute you're at the Olympics competing, and the next minute you're back home in Australia watching the closing ceremony on TV. So it was a bit strange, but I think ultimately all those that did go made a better statement to the Soviets. We competed with an Olympic flag, not the national flag. We didn't play our national anthems. We only played the Olympic anthem if someone medaled. So we had the opportunity actually at the Games to perhaps make a little bit of a protest against the Soviet Union. But at the same time, you know, there were so many Soviet athletes that were good friends of mine that it wasn't their doing. And I think in hindsight, Christian, when we look back, Russia were in Afghanistan right through till 1990, another 10 years, and no one seemed to care or protest. And don't forget, in Australia, our government was still doing wheat trade with the Soviet Union. So in the end, I realised I'd made the right decision.
What was your best moment?
As an athlete, definitely 1984, 4 years later at the Los Angeles Olympics. And I think because, and I was almost going to say because I made a lot of sacrifices, but they're not sacrifices, they're choices. And they were choices that I wanted to make to get where I wanted to be, which was to become, you know, the first Australian male to make finals on a springboarding platform, which hadn't been done. And it might sound, you know, why not target a medal? But I think as I got older and wiser, you actually realise where you stand in the world of diving and what you're capable of. And I was not going to beat the great Greg Louganis, and the Chinese were now competing. So it's just a reality that perhaps the absolute best I could hope for on a day out might have been a fourth or fifth, and as it was an eighth and ninth. So, but I think simply when your dreams or your goals are achieved, it's when it's just a great moment in your life, because it was worth every little thing you decided to do to try and get there. And so when it comes to fruition, I think what makes it special, Christian, is that I can sit here now and tell you every score I got on every single dive from, 36 years ago, because it matters to me. It doesn't matter to anyone else. And I think that's very important as I reflect and look back, that moment was special to me, and it still is. And that's all it should matter. It should matter to anyone else, just yourself.
Yeah. If you could go back in time, 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 years, what advice would you give a younger Steve?
I think really just to keep learning. Never doubt yourself. It'd be silly to sit here and say there weren't moments and periods of doubt in my career, especially the Moscow, that, you know, you got a little bit guilty and you doubted were you doing the right thing. I think it's always important to believe in your own philosophy, if you like, your own faith, whatever you believe in, stick by it. But I think also keep learning, because as I sit here now and obviously gone from athlete to coach to performance director, I've just kept learning. What I found as a coach, which was very interesting going from an athlete, is an athlete you are very self-centered and very focused on your goals and your tunnel vision. But as a coach, now you've got to worry about 6 or 7 or 10 or 20 different personalities that no one thinks the same. And so they're fascinating challenges. So they're actually teaching you as a coach as you go along in the process. So for me, that was really important, is to learn from the athletes and other people around me. Obviously, in my day, we didn't have experts like you, strength and conditioning, but now there's such an integral part of training and preparation that, again, you know, I've learned so much from listening to the experts. So for me, it would be, make sure you keep listening and learn.
Okay. I've taken a note I wanted to ask you later, but it fits perfectly here. Working as a performance director, you helped GB to win the first medal after 44 years. In the US, you helped the US win medals at 2 Olympic Games after they have not won for 2 previous Olympic Games. What would you say are the areas a performance director can influence, and what are the areas or where you are limited?
Yeah, great point, really, because you're exactly right. There are areas where you really can't influence. And I think back to perhaps USA diving in my time there, it's predominantly college diving. That's the college employs the diving coach, and their boss is a swimming coach who's under the athletic director. So I have virtually no um, say, if you like, in the day-to-day training and aspects of the college coach and what they're doing with the athlete. But what I try to do is make sure I know what they're doing and keep involved and make the coach realize that I value what they're doing and how can I assist if you need it. And then when you plan and do camps, training preparations, competition schedules, whatever you may be doing for the national side, make sure you involve the coaches with it. And I think that's important, is that for me it was collaboration, really working with people, not just put out, here's my plan, this is what we're going to do. It's, here's a draft, let me know how this fits in with your training schedule, your plans, because the competition in the college system is very important. The athletes are on scholarship. Now their season is roughly, November to March, but internationally that could clash with a lot of competition. So you have to be flexible and just understand that you can't impact on the collegiate program. So really it's a case of don't try and be everything to everyone. Work where you can and make sure you make an impact where you really can enhance performance. And I think that's what I look at. How can I enhance their performance?
Yeah. And you have worked for GB, the US, and Australia. What would be the similarities between the roles and what would be the differences?
Yeah, I think the similarity certainly with Great Britain and Australia is it's sort of government funding. So they have UK sport and we have the Australian Institute of Sport. So the government funding is very similar. But in the US, I'd write a high performance plan and it would go to the US Olympic Committee, which is very different. And the US Olympic Committee is, of course, all funded by sponsorship and donations, etc. So there's no government funding at all in the US. So, but having said that, the similarity is I still have someone I have to write a high performance plan to, sell it, get approval, and hopefully then get the money to put the plan into operation. So that's very similar worldwide. In fact, it's usually how it works. But Britain and Australia very similar because of the government funding.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to go back to the moment of younger Steve, just because I'm so interested. You competed in the 76 Olympics, where almost the whole world competed, and the 1980 Olympics, where half of the world competed, and the 94 Olympics, where the other half of the world competed. Quote unquote.
That's right.
What are your recollections of all the different games?
Yeah, good point. 76 simply because I was 18. It's my first Olympic Games. It was almost overawing. It was certainly back then there weren't all these international competitions. And I used to watch a show and I'd have black and white videos of previous Olympians and diving highlights and in fact just general Olympic highlights, even Jesse Owens at the 1936 Olympics and things. It was just suddenly it was real. You were actually going to go to the Olympics and do the march on and everything else. And the march on was sensational. It's still a highlight simply because really I can dive in front of 10,000 people, but when you march on in front of 70 to 100,000 people, and you get chills down your spine. It's very moving. very emotional. It's and to see the torch lit is phenomenal. And I think simply because Montreal was the very first experienced, um, I can reflect back and say it was probably the most emotional type one. Um, and then also I competed, and in my own mind, if people ask me how was Montreal, a lot of the time I would say it wasn't very good, and it was because my performance wasn't very good. So I measured the Olympic experience also by my performance. And the beauty of Montreal is that, I didn't make the final, so I sat in the crowd watching the world's best in action and just looking at, okay, if I'm going to get to that level, what is my next step? So Montreal was a really, really good eye-opener and learning experience. And I think Montreal kept me going for the next 8 years, for the next 2 Olympics, because I wanted to achieve what I felt I really could do on the international world stage. And if you like, the failure of Montreal was what drove me to then having success. Okay. Moscow, the boycott, what we talked about, was a big impression. And it was very, it lacked atmosphere. The whole games lacked atmosphere. There was lots of little things, there was no internet and mobile phones back then. So you'd go into the little post office in the village and you'd make a collect call back home to Australia to talk to your parents. And my father might ask, oh, what's the Olympics like? And I said, oh, it's good, but there's a lot of military. Hello, anyone there? So they were listening to all your calls. You were being totally monitored and listened to at the Olympics. So that was quite an interesting experience. And then Los Angeles was like a party. It was a Hollywood production. And even though, a lot of the communist bloc were missing, China appeared for the first time. And that was massive, especially in diving. And I just think it probably saved the Olympics. There was talk that the Moscow Olympics, the Olympics were over. And Los Angeles not only saved it, it was the first time an Olympics actually made money, like a massive profit. And they kind of showed the way about using existing facilities. And the village wasn't built, it was at a dormitory in a college. And they were very smart what they did. And I think it saved the Olympic movement. And I must admit, the atmosphere in LA compared to anything else was, like I said, it was a bit like a party. It was imagine what the Super Bowl must be like. It was just, the Hollywood A-list were in the crowd, and you get invited out. I ended up at Hugh Hefner's mansion, can you believe it or not, because the swimmer was dating a Playboy bunny. So it was just the crazy type of surreal experience. But I remember I was playing up to the crowd in the diving competition, because Greg Louganis was getting 10s and I was getting 7.5s and 8s. And the crowd booed because they thought it looked good. So I'd get the crowd, come on, let's go. And you could really do that. As an athlete, you got, I think, more involved in competition and than you certainly did in the past.
What are the habits that make you a successful athlete and person?
Good question, really. Habits. I think as an athlete, coach, and performance director, I was always a really good listener. I remember, even as a young kid, I loved watching athletes get interviewed after even Jack Nicklaus after he'd won the Masters in his interview, because you sort of got some insight into how their mind was thinking. So it became a bit of a habit of mine as I progressed through my sporting career to really read interviews, watch them on TV, and see if I could gauge something from their mindset. And I don't know, I was just fascinated in other sports people, especially those that were having success. So that was a habit I got into quite young, just really being aware of other sports and other sports people, and just little things they might say that resonated with you, or perhaps confirmed that, yeah, okay, I am training the right way. So that was something, and I still do it to this day. I love listening to a Tiger Woods interview. His insights, his mind is working different to a lot of other golfers. It's very interesting.
Yeah. What makes the perfect diver?
Well, we haven't seen it yet, but I suppose Greg Louganis was certainly one of the closest to it. Put it this way, the Chinese, they've done their homework, and it'd be fair to say that's kind of the perfect body for diving. People have talked about Michael Phelps has the perfect swimmer's body, where his arm span is longer than his height, and normally most people's height and arm span is similar. The Chinese, with a sort of a longer trunk and shorter legs, is a very good physique to have for diving. Your center of gravity is smaller, you can spin faster. So certainly it'd be fair to say the perfect diver could be an Asian type build, but you can't underestimate the courage and guts it takes, because you might have the best anatomical and physiological shape for a diver, but you might be scared, and you can't dive scared. So you still can't beat the heart and the mind.
Yeah, that's what Greg Louganis got famous for, right? He hit the board and then he came back and.
Correct. That's really mental strength, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a morning routine?
Yeah, today I do. Obviously, when I was an athlete, it would be getting up and going to training before school or work. But what I tend to do now is being involved with the Australian Institute of Sport, they send out a daily news brief via email, electronic news, and it's news about all Australian sports, but also quite a lot of international articles, which I really like to read. I want to know what the world are doing. I even go on their websites, some of the opposition in the mornings, just to see if they've got some new initiatives. And that's one of the great things about this era we live in now, with the internet, electronic media, social media. No one's really protective or hiding any secret things now. They're quite open to sharing, make world sport perhaps even more competitive. I really like that. So I definitely, in the morning, the first thing will be reading that AIS newsletter. The other one I do is, I have to write it down because I always forget the name. Inside the Games, in the UK version. It always has some really, really interesting articles. I just love it, because there's so much knowledge out there and some great things happening that you just want to read about it and see then what maybe you can apply into your job or sport.
Yeah, well, that comes back to what you said previously about constantly learning.
Yes, exactly.
How do you prepare for important moments?
Look, in one simple word, is planning. It's something I even as an athlete, and you got to understand, when I was an athlete, my coach had a 9-to-5 job, so it was a hobby for him. So you tended to, make your own plans, and I would be like, right, I need to go and travel through Europe for 3 weeks and compete on the European tour to then ultimately prepare for the World Championships a month later. So I always felt like I knew what I needed to do, and I had a plan, and that helped me once I became a coach, and particularly now as a performance director. Obviously Tokyo's on hold, but we'd already had a base picked out and a facility, and to be honest, I went and found it 3 years ago, and we've already had 2 camps there, so the athletes could get familiar with it. So it wouldn't be something unusual, in the lead up to the Olympic Games. So for me, it's really about planning.
Yeah. How do you overcome setbacks?
Just learn from them. At first, as an athlete, when you have a setback, you get angry at yourself and annoyed. But in actual fact, when I think about it, and it doesn't matter even today, if I make a mistake, I'm actually quite excited about it, because then I'll learn from it. And I remember as an athlete, if I had a setback, a bad day in competition, which we all have, you can remember almost everything. Like, I felt so tired, my body wasn't with it, I was distracted, the judges were no good. You start to blame and do things, but you actually realize you were so aware of why things weren't working. But when you have a great day, you almost can't remember anything, and that's what they refer to as being in the zone. It just sort of clicks. It happens. There's no, your mind's not even, it's just locked in somewhere. So for me, when you have a bad day, it's actually great because you can really reflect and work out and almost pinpoint what it was that led to that. Where sometimes, and so for me, you learn more from a bad or a setback than you sometimes do from a great day.
And you just said you get excited from a mistake. I mean, I can follow the thought process. However, I believe, or I think, if you make a mistake, you are not so excited with the outcome of the mistake. How would you put that into perspective?
Yeah, and really, I can say that now. Of all the experiences I've had, but I certainly wasn't too excited as an athlete or a coach when perhaps, put it this way, if it was particularly my fault, I wouldn't say I was excited, but I guess what I mean is I'm not like disgusted in myself, or I bash myself up about it, and that's something you've got to be very careful of when you make a mistake. Is blaming people, but the worst thing is blaming yourself. It's a good thing to take responsibility, but that's what I mean, I guess, when I say excited, is that, okay, now I can analyze it and look back and work out what I did wrong so I can really prevent it happening in the future. So perhaps excited is not the word, but I don't beat myself up anymore. I'm okay with it. I'm comfortable that, okay, I made a mistake. I'll put my hand up and now I know how to fix it, if you like. So really it's more about, I'm okay that I feel I can learn from any mistakes I make now, whereas 20 years ago, I probably would have beaten myself up. You idiot! Why didn't you? So again, it's probably just experience that I'm in that position where I'm more comfortable with myself if I have made a mistake.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to this growth mindset versus fixed mindset idea, right? So you approach it as an opportunity rather than I don't know what but as an opportunity.
No, that's right. Yeah. You're right. Out of these things, an opportunity does arise.
Yeah. Who's your role model and why?
I think as a young kid, you're watching sport, and I think we all have many. I think the biggest one for me in my career might have been Greg Norman, the golfer. He's just slightly older than me. He was having success at the same sort of time, breaking through on the Australian scene and the world scene in 1976. So I tended to follow and aspire to what he was doing because, back then Australia, it wasn't like we had an abundance of superstars. We did quite well in swimming, and certainly back in the 50s and 60s, we had some great tennis players, but 70s and 80s, Australia didn't really have a lot of superstars. And Greg Norman was making that breakthrough on the global stage. So anyone that can really, because when I grew up, like I said, people were excited that I could get eighth in the world. Whereas now there's a lot of focus on getting medals. It's a different mindset, I guess. But Greg Norman was another one trying desperately to win that US Masters golf, and through either his own fault or people hitting freak shots, never quite got to do it. But again, and I like to think I did that a little bit too, he opened the door for a whole new generation. And now Australia has a lot of great golfers, male and female. And I think people could look back and they will tell you that Greg Norman inspired them. So, yeah, he was definitely someone I admired and looked up to.
Yeah. It's like it's impossible until it's done, right? So if someone paves the way, then it's easier for others to follow.
Yeah, very, very true. And, as I say, Australian diving now has won 12 Olympic medals, including 2 gold medals. So, perhaps somewhere there, I helped start that progress.
Yeah. What is the best advice you received and who gave it to you?
That's a good one because it's actually not advice, but it just turned my career around. And I was competing in Holland way back in 1974, and I was, 15, 16 years of age, and I'm actually very big for a diver. I'm a bit over 6 feet, and I've got long legs and long arms, and it's definitely not the right build for a diver. But back then, there wasn't really the science anyway. But the Dutch coach came up to myself and my father when we were diving in the Dutch championships, which I won. So there, got even with him. No, but he said to me, "You'll never make a diver," and that was red rag for bull for me. That was like, right, I will show you, and that just stuck with me, and it has my whole life. So it was more a case of when people tell you you can't, you don't need any more motivation if it's something you really want. And I saw him 2 years later at Montreal Olympic Games, and he apologised and came up and said, "Oh, well, you proved me wrong." And I said, "Yep," and probably many people. But so in its own way, he did me a favour. But it did stick with me. It just burned with me that you don't even know me. How can you say that? So I think it was a great thing in a way when I look back, because it kept pushing me and driving me forward. And I feel for some people on social media that, well, I hope actually they can use it that way. That every now and then, somebody might put something on social media, and then someone will respond that they don't even know, but it can affect them. Whereas all I can say is just use it to inspire you.
You look back on 50 years of experience in diving. How does a typical training day look like? How did it look like in your times? How does it look like nowadays?
Yes, it's all very different, that's for sure. Look, I did 1 year of university and said, look, I'm going to defer because I can always go back to school, but I can never go back to an Olympics. So that was my mindset in the 70s, and I did that. But obviously, you still needed money to make it work. So I ended up working 2 jobs. I got the job in the bank. So I'd go at 7 o'clock in the morning before work from 9 till 4:35, go off and train again. And then at 7 o'clock at night, I'd go and work as a doorman at a nightclub because I just needed some extra money, cash in hand. I hope the tax man's not listening. So, so I worked 2 jobs, and then what I'd do and train around it, obviously. Not for the same length of time, maybe an hour in the morning, hour and a half at night if I was lucky. But then what I would do is I'd take 6 months of leave from work without pay, but that was fine. Sell my car and then go and train in America next to Greg Louganis in California at the time. So we actually became really good friends because I thought if I'm going to get better, I might as well dive with the best. And as I said, so it's not a sacrifice, it was a choice, and it was great. But now everything's provided. It's in Australia in particular. It's run by the Australian Institute of Sport Funding. We have state institutes, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, Hobart, that support the athletes with strength and conditioning, nutrition, sports psych, biomechanics, whatever you may need. Obviously, it didn't exist in my day. So if you got injured, you just put a bit of ice on it and go back and try it again. So it's really great how professional everything is, and the wonderful support. And the athletes today in diving in our main centres do 10 training sessions a week, but not all in the water, which is something I did. They have dry land training now where they have diving boards in the pits and trampolines and harnesses and everything else. And they do 2, sometimes 3 S&C sessions a week as part of their training, and they'll probably get massage once a week, and if they've got an injury, physio once or twice as well. So, but having said that, and they get funding, they're on a kind of a scholarship, and we pay for all their trips and everything else. So, whilst it's very different, I just call it's evolved. It's fantastic where it is. The level of diving worldwide is quite phenomenal, like every sport. But I also think they're a lot more accountable. If I made a mistake or stuffed up, it was just on me. But now if, there's something doesn't work out, they're so accountable. You could lose your scholarship or might cut your funding, or and I think that's what adds to a lot of the athlete wellness and the stress of today. We're so fixated on you've got to get a medal instead of how can we help them enjoy the sport and have a personal best? Because if we do that, they'll leave the sport very happy. We don't want them to leave the sport, angry, not liking it. So inadvertently, I think it's a bit harder for them these days just because of the added pressure. Having said that, the funding for the sport has been there before they were born. So it's something they've just grown up with. And most of them deal with it very, very well. But I do think at times they've certainly got more pressure on them or expectation than what I had to deal with.
Yeah. It just sparked my interest. You said you trained with Greg Louganis. I remember the '84 Olympic Games were the first Olympic Games I can really remember as a young boy. And
Yep.
I saw him, for example. What do you think made him special?
Two things. When you watch a great athlete in any sport, it's almost like you're watching in slow motion. And he had this amazing power, but grace and beauty. And he'd do dives, and it just looked effortless and in slow motion. Yet, he's working as hard as anyone else, but it never looked it. The other thing, and I used to chat to him about it, because when I was in America, actually, I brought him in as athlete mentor because I said, hey, you got to start teaching these athletes your mindset. And one of the great things he had that separated him from so many athletes, or certainly divers, is I said, how did you deal with all the pressure at a home Olympics, because he's from LA, in front of all this crowd and this massive expectation? Plus, you've had to wait 8 years since Montreal to have a go because you boycotted Moscow. How did you deal with all that expectation and pressure? And he said, oh, there's no pressure. I just looked at it as I'm a performer and these people have come to watch my show, so I better put on a show. And it was just so sort of innocent and natural that he saw himself as a performer. And that really did resonate with me as I went along, because most of us, we're the competitor or whatever it is, but he was a performer. And I think that separated him. Put it this way, that's why he was so good in a competition. And I think that was like a Michael Jordan. He put on a show, he performed. He wanted to show him he's the best. So, yeah, he was a performer, and I think that separated him from a lot of his competitors.
Yeah. You know what's funny? That's exactly what Inge de Bruin, the Dutch swimmer, she said the same. She said every time she walked into the arena, she just imagined everyone just came to watch her, which took the pressure off and allowed her to just perform. Yeah,
okay. Right. And that's what makes these people great, isn't it? The way they see the moment instead of being intimidated, or they're comfortable in it, and you almost want to show off. I think it's fabulous.
Yeah, really cool. Do you want to nominate someone to be interviewed?
Oof. Well, Greg Norman, if you can, but I don't have a contact. Well, I mean, obviously in diving circles, Greg Louganis would be wonderful, or perhaps David Baddiah, who won the 2012 Olympic gold medal, USA diving. He's just recently going to be involved in a ESPN documentary, actually about athlete pressures and wellness. And he's an Olympic gold medalist, but he can tell you that before he got it, he went through athlete wellness struggles. So he could be a very interesting one too. But gosh, there's so many great athletes out there. You can pick, but David Baddiah or Greg Louganis would certainly be terrific stories.
Yeah, for sure. What's going on in the life of Steve at this moment? You're heading into your 12th Olympic Games.
Yeah, well, it's all put on hold, isn't it? I hope I last another year with COVID and everything.
That's true.
So yeah, it's a crazy time for sure. I guess at the moment we're trying to we have changed plans, new preparation, new competition schedule. but we've also got to have a plan B, simply because, yeah, maybe Tokyo still won't go ahead next year. And what can I do to keep the athletes and coaches motivated? And because let's face it, they train so hard for that particular moment in time to compete. So working on even trying to establish a national league in Australia where they'd compete around the country, and it could be exciting. Compete for prize money, and just give them something to aim for should the Olympics not take place. But we're trying to be positive. We expect it to go ahead. So if you like, we're just looking at business as normal and preparing for Tokyo next year. But it's important to have a B plan. So and apart from that, trying to stay healthy and keep out of trouble.
Cool. Where can people find you?
Well, LinkedIn is probably the easiest one, and I do a little bit on Instagram occasionally. Steve Foley 57. So otherwise, through you, they can get you through me on the our secret email combination.
For sure, I will link all that up.
Yeah, great.
Steve, thanks a lot for your time. It was awesome.
Christian, lovely. Yeah, I appreciate it, and look forward to watching Greg Louganis in the future.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.